When we listen or read the news, it's easy to feel like everything is doom and gloom, like the economy is going through challenges, elections, or whatever it might be, and how does this impact your business? Futurist and business coach Chris Whelan shares with us today how we should really look at the market changes and what to do about it. Chris, why did you become a business coach?
Michelle, for me, it was pretty easy. I studied business at university. I worked for 25 years in management consulting in South Africa, across different parts of the world, most recently in Australia. And the thing that really struck me is that in that corporate world, there's a lot of good stuff, but the runway is very, very long. What do I mean by that? My most recent consulting gig was with BHP. And no matter what we did, if the price of coal went up, they made money. If it went down, they didn't make money. And for me, my whole purpose in life is about how do I create better, more prosperous futures. I have some beliefs very strongly that business is a force for good, and at least if it's done right, it can be. And it's about growing businesses. And so in New Zealand, something like 97% of all businesses are SMEs. And the thing that struck me is that for me to fulfill my purpose in life, the best way to do it, and this might sound a bit strange, but the very best way to do it is to work with those SME business owners with a short runway. What we decide today gets implemented tomorrow. And again, when done right, that means their businesses grow and everyone benefits. And for me, that's massively important.
So, Chris, you've had an incredible career. You mentioned, consulting. You've consulted for some very, very large organisations. You mentioned BHP, but, you worked with McKinsey for quite some time, and you've been involved as a futurist, for many government organisations as well. Tell me, what's the difference for business owners out there who are listening between, say, hiring a consultant or a business coach?
It's interesting. Some of the clients that I work with, at least initially, Michelle, they actually want a consultant. They want someone to do the work for them. And pay them a transactional fee and off they go. And whilst that is fine for some people, the big, big difference, and I like to sort of, not to reference myself with muscles, but for the business owner, build internal muscle so that they can execute forever. When I work with them as a coach, that's exactly what we're doing. We're not just doing a piece of work, doing it, disappearing, and yes, the work's done, but they haven't got any internal strength. The difference between a consultant and a coach is that the coach builds the internal capability of the organization, of the business owner, of his or her team. And once we've done it once, they can use it forever. Whereas with a consultant, typically the consultant has to keep coming back and coming back and coming back. The two serve different purposes. But the big difference, and the reason I'm into coaching, is that it allows us to build internal capability. And over time, you see tremendous growth in the people you're working with. So huge difference in that space.
Is that a South African term where you call clients clowns?
I say clowns. I hope I didn't say clowns.
Like clowns? Were you saying clients? Okay, clients. No, okay, sorry. That's a language thing. My apologies.
An accent thing. I was told South African accent is very sexy, but maybe it's not.
Well, that's for our audience. Let's ask them. So, Chris, you get to work with some amazing companies. What do you see as the biggest challenge that most of them have?
Typically, Michelle, in the game of business, and I do refer to business as a game, in the game of business, we keep score by the profit that we make. And so the obvious answer is more money. The biggest challenge is making more money. But interestingly, that's not what I've found over the last 3 or 4 years. For some people, obviously, it is the case. They need to make more money, and that's fantastic, and I help them with it. But for a lot of the people that I'm working with, time is their biggest thing. You can make more money tomorrow if you spend it today, but you can't obviously ever get time back. And for a lot of the people I'm working with, their biggest challenge is how do they get more time back in their lives? It may be a stage of life thing, but they want to make good money. That's a given. But how do they get more time back to spend with their family, to spend with their kids, to grow the next generation? So that's what I'm seeing a lot of. The key metric for them is working on a business that actually runs without them, and so they can actually have time back.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept that feels so out of reach for so many business owners, like get more time back,
Absolutely.
it's, that can be a challenge.
Absolutely.
So where do you start?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on what the challenge is. I mean, for me, it's always, you mentioned earlier that I have a background in future studies as a futurist. For me, it's important to start with where do they want to get to long term, right? So what is their true north? In our language, we talk about doing an alignment of their personal life with their business. So starting there, figuring that out, recently working with someone and working with him and his wife. They're both business partners and obviously husband and wife, figuring out what they want to do long term with their lives. So that sets the true north. Then we can sit down and say, right, what's getting in the way? How do we structure the business to make sure that we can achieve that? What I see a lot of is people don't have well-tested systems and processes, Michelle. And what does that give them when they do have it? Gives them consistency, obviously, in delivery. It gives them consistency in their marketing, in their customer service, all of those things. But it also gives them time to actually not have to redo stuff, time not to have to worry about, did I do it right the first time? And so what I'm seeing a lot of is once we get the systems and the processes sorted out, a lot of other things fall into place. And as I said, it gives them the consistency and gives them profit as well, and gives them the time back. So I see a lot of that. Yes, they need good people, but ultimately what I'm seeing is that the best businesses are run by, I know it's probably a bit of a cliche, but the best businesses are literally run with great systems and great people that run the systems.
So you talked about, future, that you got to be, clear on where you're heading. That can, that's great in concept, but for if I'm sitting with no time to even think about the future because I'm fixing the problems of the now,
Yep.
Why is it so important? And talk to me about how I can kind of shift my thinking to start looking at the future.
Well, I mean, I guess this might sound very colloquial, but if you don't know where you're going, then pretty much anywhere will be fine. Right? If you're driving I live in Wellington. If you're driving from Wellington to Auckland, you know where you're going. There's a lot of routes to get there, but you at least know where you're going. And I don't know how this will work, but if I use that in analogy, if you're just trying to fix the car the whole time, you're never going to get to Auckland. You're never going to get to the destination you want to get to. And again, the challenge with that is that you end up chasing your tail. I find that to be a race to the bottom, if you like, because short-termism doesn't lead to long-term thinking. It doesn't lead to a little bit of sitting back and reflecting on what is it that really, really, really is important to me, to my wife, to my family. And fixing problems, absolutely, you've got to do, but you've got to have the long-term perspective. Your question as well related to how do we do that? And when I go into clients, when I work with them, business owners typically want to fix the problems right now. So we'll sit down and we'll say, right, what are your priorities? I use a business assessment, which you'll be very familiar with, our 6 steps assessment, and say, right, what are the major priorities that you've got? Where are the biggest gaps in your mind in the business? And then we'll sit down and put an action plan together, potentially for quite immediate action, short-term stuff, get it done. But at the same time, we are still thinking long-term. The reason we do that with the short-term is to make sure we put out the fires if there are fires so that you can build for the long-term. It's no good saying to someone, hey, look, we're going to do something in a year's time when the house is burning today. So you've got to triage the problem, which we do. But it's not a question of either or, Michelle. It's a question of both and.
Okay, so talk to me about the future. Talk to me about how I can start looking at the future.
Right. Well, I mean, if you imagine, if you close your eyes and imagine the dark sky at night with thousands or millions of stars above you, if you look for the Southern Cross, we live in the Southern Hemisphere, look for the Southern Cross, there's 4 or 5 stars, and you've got to be able to find them and then figure out the pattern. In some ways, understanding the future is a little bit like that. You want to understand what are those faint pinpricks of light. You want to look beyond the horizon. And typically, and I probably sound like a lecturer, but typically you want to actually not allow the logic that got you into the mess, the problem that you're sitting in. Don't let that be the thing that constrains you. Go out into the future and say, right, let me imagine, let's just say you want to double your profit, or you want to have a better team, or you want to have systems and processes that we spoke about a moment ago. What would need to have happened to have gotten that right? Go out into there and imagine the best situation. Imagine what success looks like. If anyone's listening to this and they enjoy sport, imagine you've won the match, you've won the tennis match, or you've won the World Cup, or whatever it is that you've won. What did you have to do to get there? and then work backwards from that to say, right, to have achieved that, I needed to have done A, B, C, and D. And that's a far better way of doing it, because you don't get stuck in the problem that you're facing today. You imagine the future, and then by doing that, you can actually allow yourself to create and put actions in place to be the person you need to be, to become the, if you like, the champion sports person or the champion business person. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it's so easy as a business owner to get stuck in the now.
Sure.
And not see what those things are that would have to happen in order for you to have that future business or life.
Sure.
So I love that. So looking forward, and then what, in order for that to have been achieved, what would be the things that need to happen? Okay. So give me an example of some businesses that you've done this with.
Sure. Trying to think. I guess the first one, and probably for me, and I mentioned earlier that for me, my purpose in life, or my belief in my purpose in life, is to create prosperous futures. And it's absolutely what motivates me. It's why I got into coaching. It's why I got into business. Worked with a Glacier over the last, must be 3 or 4 years. When they bought the business, it was a husband and wife team. They bought the business. They bought it to set it up for their retirement. They want a business that can work without them. They've got a whole host of things that they want to achieve outside of business. Family trusts and legacies and all of those good things. And so that's a bit of background, a bit of their motivation. I would also say that they were pretty tired. They recognized they were tired, and hugely motivated. Tired, hugely motivated, didn't have the technical skills, didn't have the business skills. Had a team at the time of 7 people, Michelle, and a good revenue, but a team of 7 with very limited process, very limited structure. They were just doing good work, but doing good work by working hard. What we did, again, sat down, said, right, let's call them Jill and Jack. Jill and Jack, where do you want to get to long term? We explained that, we understood that, we put that picture together, then worked backwards and said, right, to do that, we need to systemize your business, because at the moment it's a little bit chaotic. We need to make sure at some point in time we get the right general manager in place. So we put together an organogram, a long-term, almost said, look, when the business is finished, when it can work without you, what will it look like? From that, we built the organogram, and then we put processes in place to drive towards it. So, and then literally it's a question of meeting regularly, the normal stuff, accountability, questioning, asking, probing different things, looking at tracking the numbers, making sure you know your KPIs, all the stuff that business owners know they need to do, but frequently miss out on doing because they, as you said earlier, they're trying to fix short-term problems. So that's what we did. If I then look at what was achieved, today that business has got 26 or 27 people. It tends to change. So they've gone from 7 to 26, 27.
In what period of time?
3 years.
Okay.
Which is a big jump. But we did that in both organic growth and inorganic growth. So they bought different businesses and opened up different divisions. So massive jump in number of people. The revenue's gone up. The last time I checked was 67, almost 68% over that period of time. And interestingly, the net profits, and this was a period of huge reinvestment of profit. The net profit percentage has stayed constant. So what does that mean? What does it look like? Well, it means the revenue's gone up massively. The net profit stayed the same. So the quantum, the dollar of the net profit has gone up hugely. As I say, the team has grown, which I think is a win, because that means, there's an extra 20 families that have got jobs. But I also referenced that when they bought the business, they were personally tired. About a year, maybe 18 months, maybe 24 months ago now, they bought a caravan. The two of them bought a caravan. Then they realized, of course, that their ute wasn't big enough to tow the caravan, so they had to buy a new ute. But what that's allowed them to do, Michelle, is to take the dashboard that we put together, so that, testing and measuring the numbers, and they go down to Queenstown, or they go to Wanaka, or they go traveling. Sometimes with their grandkids, sometimes without. And the point is they can run their business from their caravan whilst the general manager is there on a day-to-day basis. Now, that might sound sort of like, for some people that might sound like pie in the sky, but that's a total winner. Massive business growth, massive staff growth, and they've got time to enjoy life. So, that's, I don't know, and this particular person and I had breakfast last week. He is ecstatic. He's really enjoying stuff. So, it's a win.
Wow, what a different different life they would have, an outlook on their business too, that they're,
Absolutely.
you go from sort of being quite resentful to your business because you have no time to do the things you want to do, to being in love with your business again because it's creating this freedom and life that you wanted to live. So, even though that's where they're at now, 3 years later, it's that it didn't take 3 years. That's been a gradual kind of happen pretty quickly by the sounds of it.
Yeah, look, we've got further ambition. That's not where it's going to end. I've always said to this particular person and to anyone, I suppose, that I work with, that I can't resolve the problems if they've got problems outside of business. It's very important to understand the lane that one swims in. But what I can do is to help them get their business to the point that they can actually have time to do those other things. Someone described me the other day as their business therapist, exactly for that reason. They've got their business running so that they could sort out their personal stuff. And, it's pretty hard to get a bigger compliment than that, actually.
That is. Is that on your new business card, Chris?
I should put that down as a business therapist. I think I might have a bit of problem from my wife, who is a therapist.
So, looking at where they are now, and obviously plans for them for the future, what is the next step for that family-owned business?
Well, revenue is looking at about $5 million now, and the idea is to double that over the next 3 to 4 years. And if we get that right, or if they get it right, there's the family trusts that I spoke about. Those things kick in. Their kids and their grandkids kick in, and that's important to them at a personal level. But what it also means is that the staff that they have, and these guys are hell of a good at looking after their staff. The staff that they have continue to grow, and not just the employees, but the employees' families. So there's a whole concept of, yes, there's a nuclear family, obviously, and there's a nuclear team. But in both of their cases, they want to grow the business for, keep score by profit that we mentioned earlier, but also make a difference in the lives of their own families and the families that they employ. So I guess it might sound a little bit altruistic, but interestingly, Michelle, I've seen that with a lot of business people, and I guess it reflects what I said up front, that business as a force for good is potentially very, very powerful.
And so when you think about, again, coming back to that, looking at the future without that clear North Star that you talked about, and so are the stars the stepping stones along the way? They're the stepping stones on what needs to happen in order for you to achieve that dream?
I hadn't really thought about that, but that's actually a good way of putting it. Yeah, so you've got the North Star, if you like, the true north of where you want to get to. But I hadn't thought about that. I'm going to steal that. Taking those individual stars as the stepping stones makes a lot of sense, because ultimately, I don't know how familiar you are with boxing. There's a guy pretty famous, Mike Tyson. If one went to business school, which I did, then you'd be told that no strategy survives first contact. Now, Mike Tyson, in his philosophical way, took that and said everyone's got a plan until he smashes them in the face, which is a bit rough, but forgive me. The point is, to your thing about the stars, yes, you can have a North Star, but you're never going to sail in a straight line to that North Star. So I like that. That's a great idea of the stars that hook you up are the ones you need to walk with as you move towards your ultimate destination. And recognize that it is a journey.
I'll let you have that
one. Thank you.
Yeah, it is a journey, isn't it? It's not just about the destination. It's about enjoying those steps along the way. And, there will be ups and downs and challenges that you have. But, one of the benefits of having a business coach is to be there in your corner, assisting you and guiding you along the way.
I think that's right. I mean, again, we can talk about the hard numbers, and we do, and they're important because that's how we keep score. I do think it's also important, though, that the concept of if you spend money today, you can make more tomorrow, but if you lose time, you can't. Therefore, it's important to enjoy the journey. Therefore, it's important to work hard, work diligently, all of those good things. And I love the fact you've nailed it, basically. I love the fact that as a business coach, I'm in the business owner's corner, helping him or her to do the journey and seeing them grow and seeing them develop. It's, if I talk about profit, that's profit for me, because that's real return on investment.
Chris, as a futurist, and you've obviously got your eye very much on, the market and the economy, it's so easy for business owners to feel a little bit, I guess, in fear of, what's happening and, the security of their business and what's next for us in all different markets across the world. What would you say to business owners listening?
Sure. Interesting, Michelle. I am a futurist, you're right. I also happen to be the chairperson of a economics consultancy. And I don't pretend to have all the answers. In fact, in many ways, I've kind of fallen in love with not having all the answers. But here's the thing. I don't think, and I said this to someone last week, I don't think the growth of your business, whatever business it is, whatever market you're in, is limited by the economy. Absolutely. Please hear what I'm not, or don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying the economy doesn't affect you. I'm not saying that events in Europe and the Middle East don't affect us. They absolutely do. But those are factors that are beyond our control. And yes, they affect us, but they shouldn't limit us. Why do I say that? Because what I've seen in my own work here and around the world is that the biggest constraint to growth of any business is the business owner's growth, his or herself. So if they are learning, if they are constantly curious, if they are constantly pushing the parcel, constantly looking beyond the horizon, their business will continue to do the same. So that's the first thing. And I guess the second thing is that we're familiar with, or you'll be familiar with, the concept of operating above the point of power. If you allow those external circumstances, if everything's out there, if it's not inside of me, if I blame things out there somewhere for my life, then I've given up my power, I've given up my agency. And so what I do with a lot of business owners is spend time in that space to help them to recognize that, yes, those things happen, but we can't change them. The Prime Minister, unfortunately, doesn't phone me and say, look, what should I do with the interest rates? But what I can do is to help you plan and see ahead and say, right, if that happens, what are we going to do about it? How do we keep ownership? How do we keep agency? And how do we respond rather than say, oh, my hands are tied, I can't do it? Because as soon as you do that, you've basically given up the fight. And at that point, you might want to ask yourself, is it better to go to the beach? Because you really, really, really want to own the outcomes, even if you have to work hard to do it. There's nothing more rewarding than seeing that.
So what you've said is, if I can just recap on that, because it's super valuable. So sure. One is your own mindset. So not letting what we hear on the news or what's happening around us necessarily drag us down below the point of power where we feel like we have no control. And the second thing was really making sure you've got your eye on your vision, that North Star, to keep you on track for your business, and know and understand that things will change externally from time to time. How much should you keep an eye on what's happening externally? I know I've kind of switched off from watching the news because it can be a bit depressing from time to time.
Are you okay if I give you a quick real-life client story about this?
Go for it.
So I don't know how well you know New Zealand, and this may not apply to obviously people around the world, but New Zealand had a general election last October. I think it was October. One of my clients, now we work very closely together. He knows his numbers very, very, very well. I don't know if people are familiar with it. There should be the 5 ways numbers. So leads, conversion rate, average dollar sale, frequency of purchase, and margin. We know that, right? We know it down to pretty much, not quite every single van, but pretty close. We certainly know it at a macro level for the business. What we saw last year, just prior to the election, we started seeing the leads trending down. Now, again, the Prime Minister, surprisingly enough, didn't phone either of us and say, what do I do about the election? But we could see the things going down. And so what we did was to say, hang on, things are happening here. There's going to be a big change of government. There's going to be totally different policies, new government, new policies, new everything. We've seen the evidence of the leads going down. We've seen the average dollar sale actually stayed pretty constant, but the time from a lead to turning it into or from a prospect turning into a client was increasing. What we did, Michelle, was to adjust the marketing and how we were going about the marketing. We adjusted the volume. We didn't back off and say, hang on, what do we do here? We're not deer in the headlights. We changed things, right? So that was October. November was a bit down. December, not surprisingly, December, January, people go on holiday. But by the end of January, those leads were back up to not just to where they were in October, they were back up to the record for 2023. And that was, I guess I look at that and say, that's a person saying, look, let me know the numbers, make sure that I know where I am. Yes, I can't change the fact that it's going to be a change of government, but I'm going to respond differently. So I think and if I look now, so that was January, over the last 6 months, they're going gangbusters. Are they, has the general economy been down? Absolutely. None of us are suggesting that it's been easy. But there are certainly examples and certainly ways to say, you've got the what's happening in the economy, but then you've got the so what. And the so what is, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to respond?
What and so what? Love that.
That sounds a bit harsh.
No,
right?
I love that. I think
it works well.
Very simplest form. I think that's really great lessons, great takeaways. Thank you for sharing. So, when you look at, everyone is in business to create more life. That's the whole goal of a business, is to create a better life, more money and future for you and your family, and legacy, like you've mentioned. Let's talk about net profit for a minute.
Sure.
So sometimes it's not just a matter, and we know this in the marketplace, there's lots of people when we're scrolling on social media, there's lots of people telling us they've got the recipe for sales success or generating more leads, and one thing I just, was I want to come back to in the story that you were just sharing, it's that client didn't, when the economy shifted, they didn't take their foot off the pedal. They just slowly, reduced the speed. And pivot's one of our favorite words in business, isn't it? Pivot. But they were able to. So, and 6 months later, they've actually exceeded targets. But let's talk about net profit for a minute, because again, it's about making more money in your business. And how do you link that then to the future in terms of vision for you with your clients?
Well, again, net profit, or profit as a general statement, is how we keep score in the game of business. Are we, a lot of people are saying, well, profit doesn't matter. But actually, if you don't make good profit, the fact is you're not going to be in business that long. And all the other things that you want to achieve, you're not going to be able to achieve. So for me, it's a question of what do you want to achieve by when? Because it's not just what do you want to achieve. It's what do you want to achieve by when. So what net profit do you want to achieve? When do you want to achieve it by? There's probably a third question to that, and that is why do you want to achieve it? And that goes to, to the motivation of the person in the first place. But I'll give you again, it's a very recent client example. Took someone on a couple of months back. I'm in my head, I can see the picture of the 6 steps to, building a sustainable, profitable, highly profitable business. And down in the bottom left-hand corner of the picture that I've created is financial mastery, Michelle. And part of financial mastery obviously is net profit. And one of the elements there is profit break even. So bear with me. It's break even. I've taken that a little step further based on the coaching that I've received and said, look, let's talk about profit break even. So what we did with this client, first thing I got him to do, sit down and say, right, again, all my clients are called Joe, by the way. So sat down and said, right, Joe, what is it that you want to, what is your profit break even? How much profit do you want to make? In order to do that, what's your break even got to be? What did that give him? Well, it gave him the revenue that he needed to make over the following 12 months in order to break even and pay himself a decent profit. We then broke that down to a monthly basis, and we've even gone as far as breaking it down to a weekly basis. He's taken it on his own bet. He's taken it a step further, and he's got 3 or 4 teams that he's now sat down with them and said, you, Mr. or Mrs. Team number 1, need to deliver X every single week. And he's using that in a whole range of ways, Michelle, including, do you want to be part of this team? Do you want to be part of winning in the game of business? And all of that started off with us saying, what's your profit break even? What's the net profit you want to make over the next 12 months? So again, it's a question of starting with the end in mind, working backwards, and then it translates into a whole range of different areas. Obviously the numbers, but also How do you make sure you've got the right skills on the bus? How do you make sure you've got the right people in the right seats on the bus? How do you make sure you've got the right processes? Now, some of those links aren't immediately apparent, so you've got to find them. But you're not going to get that if you don't understand what profit you want to make in the first place. I hope that wasn't too convoluted.
No, that was awesome. So I'm just thinking of the Mike Tyson analogy now in terms of that longer strategy. It's left, right hook, right?
Exactly. And interestingly, I mean, as I said, I live in Wellington. If I were to go a couple of kilometers behind me, I'd be in the middle of the harbor. If you sail from one side of the harbor to the other side, you know where you want to get to. But inevitably, the wind's going to change because Wellington can be quite breezy at times. So when you're halfway across the harbor, or when you're halfway through the year in business and the wind changes, you tack. Right? That's what every sailor does. And that's what every good business person does as well.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
Oh, dear.
Question number 1, what's your favorite business book?
My favorite business book. I would have to say probably anything by John Maxwell. I love his stuff. There's 2 that immediately spring to mind. Good Leaders Ask Great Questions is one. Sorry, I'm not answering this, not giving you one book. I'm giving you a couple. Good Leaders Ask Great Questions would be one. I'd highly recommend it. The 15 Laws of Growth, I would absolutely go with. There's a guy, Ken Blanchard, who really, really appeals to me. The book's about that thick. It's tiny. You can read it in one sitting. It's the 1 Minute Manager. There's a whole series of them. And what I really like about Blanchard's stuff in the 1 Minute Manager is he talks about finding time to praise your team, which I think is fantastic. So any of those books, people talk about good to great, and there's others, but those would be 3 that spring to mind immediately.
Great. Question number 2, who's been the best mentor or coach for you?
Am I allowed to pick 2?
Yes, you can pick 2, no problem.
Excellent. I think in the immediate right now, I have to give an absolute shout out to a guy I've got a huge amount of time for. You know him well. He's based in Nelson, Bruce Wilson. Bruce has been absolutely incredible for me over the last 4 years, 5 years, just in terms of his patience as I've had to reinvent myself from a corporate person, a corporate consultant, even worse, to a business coach. Bruce is his knowledge, his insights, his understanding has been remarkable and been, absolutely fantastic. And then if I were to go back a bit further, there was a guy I worked with in South Africa, a guy called Mike Kane. Mike and I share a common set of beliefs, spiritual beliefs. Mike has got a huge EQ. And at the time, I reported to him and was doing my master's in future studies. So Mike actually when I say he had a huge EQ, he gave me the time to come to work early in a consulting environment, which is unheard of. Come to work early, leave early. We were doing bringing all of the EY partnerships across Africa together. And I did a lot of my studying based on that work. And his guidance was incredible. So those 2, Bruce and Mike, people say you owe them a debt of gratitude, but the reality is I could never pay them back for what they've done for me.
And what's been the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Michelle, there's been lots, but for me, I think probably the best piece of advice, and I hope this resonates with people, is to be interested, not interesting. What do I mean by that? It's really not about me. My job is to be interested in my clients, to be interested in their success, their well-being, their flourishing, and not to see how interesting I can be, because it's literally not about me. That advice I try and keep in the forefront of my thinking all the time.
Love it. Chris Whelan, thank you for joining. Thank you for changing lives and building businesses.
Great pleasure. It really is a privilege, and it's a lot of fun.
Michelle Adams, your host here. Hats off to you for committing to your learning by listening to this podcast. And if you'd like some help implementing some of these strategies, then click the link in the description to find your local action coach. They can help you put these strategies into action and take your business and your life to the next level. In the meantime, like and subscribe so that you're the first to get our next episode. We'll see you soon.